Okay, here we go. Good evening. So tonight, planes, trains, and automobile, of course, with a connection to Israel. So let's kick off with planes. If I'm going to talk about planes, I need somewhere to land them. So in 1917, when World War I ended, there were places to land planes because you can see the two pictures on the right-hand side. So the German Air Force had a very considerable presence in Palestine during World War I. Here you see German planes, and they built airfields, airstrips. They were nothing more than grass landing strips at Semach, which is just south of the Kinneret, at Ramla, and also in Gaza. The next, and these were all used in the time of the British Mandate, but the first real airfield or airport that got built under the British Mandate was in 1934 when an airport was built in Haifa. In 1937 when an airport was built in Lod, that is today Ben Gurion Airport. I remember Ben Gurion Airport. Yeah, I remember it. And in 1938, and I'll talk about the reasons why, an airport was built at Stedov, actually in Tel Aviv. And in the period, certainly of the 30s and the 40s as well, also bodies of water were used to land planes. So planes landed on the lake of, on the Kinneret. And also, amazingly enough, planes also landed on the Dead Sea. Originally, I think there was a major crash on the Kinneret, so the British switched to landing planes at Kalia, which is on the Dead Sea. The picture you see on the left is the terminal building at Lida Airport. Okay, so the first airline that started, by the way, I'm mainly talking about civilian airlines and civilian trains. I'm not talking about military tonight. So the first civilian airlines that operated out of Palestine was Imperial Airlines. Imperial Airlines would eventually become BOAC, and BOAC would eventually merge with BEA, even I can remember when that happened, and would become British Airways. So in 1924, Imperial Airlines was formed. It's, as the name suggests, it functioned to link up all the vast parts of the British Empire. In 1927, the first commercial flight flew from Cairo and Baghdad to Karachi in India, and it flew via the landing strip that we talked about in Gaza. I remember when my parents talked about flying to Israel, they talked about they flew from London to Paris, I don't know, to Greece, from Greece to Tel Aviv. It took forever. And in 1931, Imperial Airlines started operating a flight from Athens to Cairo, and this went via somewhere in Italy that I don't remember. The plane then took off and landed in Haifa Bay, where it was refueled, took off again, landed in the Sea of Galilee, and the picture that you see on the right-hand side are the passengers being taken by boat from the plane to Tiberias. When they got to Tiberias, they'd be taken by car to Semach. Remember, we said there's a airport at Semach. And then they would take off again on another plane that could land, this time on land. They would fly from Semach to Gaza. And from Gaza, they would finally get to Cairo. No idea how long all of that would take, but it would certainly take a long time. In terms of Jewish aviation, well, Jewish aviation kicked off in the 1930s. 1935, the Maccabiah Games was held in Palestine. And one of the events in the Games was glider flying. And glider pilots came predominantly from Europe, and particularly from Germany. And Jewish pilots, after they competed, they left their gliders in Palestine. And this became the Flying Camel Club, which was formed in 1934, and the Israel Aero Club that was formed in the 1940s. I think the Israel Aero Club still exists today. And these were originally glider clubs, but in the mid-1930s, 1934, the Jews of the Yishuv decided it would be an extremely good idea if they actually had some kind of motorized plane. They approached Yitzhak Chizik and Dov Hotz. Stedov is named after Dov Hotz. And the first plane was purchased, which was a de Havilland Tiger Moth. And that was the first Jewish plane. I'm not sure that sounds quite right, calling it a Jewish plane, but it was. It was the first Jewish plane in Palestine. In terms of Jewish airlines, in 1936, Aviron was formed. This was under the umbrella of the Jewish agency. And Aviron, that you see on the right-hand side, was formed up to do various logistic acts, such as supporting building of roads, agriculture, geographical research on the land, fertilizer spraying. Of course, it also served as mainly reconnaissance for the Haganah. And of course, anything the Haganah can do, the Etzel can do as well. So in 1937, the Palestine Flying Service was formed, and this served as the air force of the Etzel. And you see on the left-hand side, you see the Etzel fighters. Well, the first so those planes couldn't take passengers as such. The first passenger plane was apart from Imperial Airlines, that was British, but the first Jewish passenger service by air was Palestine Airlines, that was formed in 1934 by Pinchas Rutenberg, who we talked about him, if you remember, in one of my first talks, when we talked about the electricity plant that was built at Naharaim. So in 1934, Rutenberg, who was very well connected with the British, he got backing from, I think, British money to form Palestine Airlines, and flights were commenced 3 times a week from Haifa to Lydda. In 1938, Stedov switched for Lydda, and the planes flew to Stedov. And the reason for that was because Lydda, Lod, was an Arab town, and the journey from Lod to Tel Aviv became increasingly more dangerous. There were terrorist attacks, and it was much safer to fly directly to Tel Aviv. In 1940, Palestine Airlines ceased operation, and all the planes were transferred to the RAF. I think one of them crashed, actually. Maybe it was shot down or crashed during the war. Which brings us to ELAL. They're never late, but how did they start up? So on September 28th, 1948, Chaim Weizmann and his wife Vera, they had been appointed, designated as presidents of the State of Israel, but they were living in Switzerland, and the government looked for a way of securely bringing them to Israel. And to do that, they took a C-54, which was an American plane extensively used in the Second World War. They took it from the Israel Air Force. It was painted. It was fitted out with furniture. Kosher meals were provided, and extra fuel tanks were put on the aeroplane. It was named ELAL. And the plane flew to Geneva, picked up President Weizmann and his wife, and embarked on a 10-hour non-stop flight to Ekron Air Force Base in Rehovot, which was very convenient because Weizmann's house was in Rehovot. And in November of 1948, ELAL was incorporated and has been flying happily until this day. And hopefully will also fly after this day as well, but we shall see. And let's go on now and talk a little bit about trains. So the first train service in Palestine was in 1892. It was the Jaffa-Jerusalem Railway. It was actually a project that was started. It had many stops, like the train projects in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Contractors went bankrupt. They ran out of money. But in 1892, the first train finally made the journey from Jaffa to Jerusalem. It took about 3.5 hours, but journeys would regularly take anything up to 6 hours. There was only one track, so the train left Jaffa in the morning and it came back from Jerusalem in the afternoon, if you were lucky. And E.A. Reynolds would write in A Practical Guide to Jerusalem, he'd write, it requires only an ordinary amount of activity to jump out and pick the flowers along the line and rejoin the train as it laboriously pants up the steep ascent to Jerusalem, a feat I myself have occasionally performed. So it was notoriously slow. In World War I, it was used by the Ottomans, and it was connected to the Hijazi Railway, which I'll talk about in a minute. And in 1920, the Jaffa-Jerusalem Railway was re-inaugurated by Herbert Samuel, who was the first British High Commissioner, and he famously said, writing to the Colonial Office, he said that the Jaffa-Jerusalem Railway should be electrified, and the electric energy for the line should be supplied by the concessionary, the company that operates the railway, which was an excellent idea. And of course, 99 years later, the Tel Aviv-Jerusalem Railway was finally electrified. So it only took 99 years. Picture at the top, somewhat grainy, is the first train arriving at the Tachana in Jerusalem. The Tachana in Jaffa, Tel Aviv, which has been turned into a restaurant complex, shopping complex, which still has a train track in the middle, is the original Jaffa terminus for the Jaffa-Jerusalem Railway. Okay, and on to the Emek Railway, the Jezreel Valley Railway. This came a little bit later in 1905. This was built by the Ottomans as a line to connect onto the Hijazi Railway. The Hijazi Railway was the main Ottoman railway connecting Damascus to Mecca, although it never actually got to Mecca, it got as far as Medina. And proposals for the Jezreel Valley Railway were made as early as 1860. And again, it stop-started. And it wasn't until 1905 that the railway line finally ran. There were 8 stations in what was Palestine. You see them by thick black dots. The train left, the western terminus was in Haifa, and the train ran through the valley, through Afula, to Bet Shan. At Bet Shan, it would turn north onto Route 90, and through the Jordan Valley, it would pass through Gesher to Tzemach. Once it got to Tzemach, it then had to get up the Golan Heights. And this was done through the Yarmouk Valley, and track was laid, 73 kilometers of track was reached to link up Tzemach to Daroa, and this was over 500 meters uphill, and at Daroa the train would link to the main Hijazi railway. And in 1906, Thomas Cook, who I think recently went bankrupt, they advertised trips to the Holy Land utilizing the Valley Line. A notable package was a trip using the Valley Line from Haifa to Tzemach, where the tourists would take a steamboat to Tiberias via the Sea of Galilee and explore the Christian holy sites around the lake. So again, the Valley Railway was used during the war by the Turks, but in 1918, when the British came in, the role, and then basically the railway that was in Palestine was British. The part of the railway that was in Syria was now under the French mandate. The British and the French divided up the rolling stock, but the French never actually operated the train at all. In 1946, on the Night of the Bridges, a bridge to the east of Tzemach was destroyed, and then in 1948, the bridge at Gesher was destroyed by the Haganah, I think it was Palmach, I don't remember exactly, but the Gesher bridge was destroyed, and then the train could only run basically as far as Bet Shan. I think after the War of Independence, the train really only ran as far as Afula, and it became very economically unviable, and in the early 50s, its use was stopped. Until, by the way, I'll mention in a second, the train that you see below is an engine and carriages. And you can't see it all. It's actually very long. And this is actually a picture that I took. This is the steam engine from the Hijazi Railway. This picture I actually took not in Israel, but it was taken in Wadi Rum in Jordan, where the massively long Hijazi train is parked, and there is actually a station that was used by the Hijaz Railway. You can still see the track there and everything. In Israel, you can also see an engine which is in Beersheba. Okay, and I didn't mention also that obviously the Jaffa-Jerusalem Railway became very economically unviable. It was very slow, and as roads began to be developed, it became much quicker to go from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem by road and not actually go on the rail. The third and last railway that I want to mention is one perhaps not as well known. This is the Haifa, Beirut, Tripoli railway that was built in 1942 by the British. It was actually involved a series of tunnels, but one tunnel we know very well, which is the 250 meter tunnel, which you can actually go into. It's still there, and it was dug at Rosh HaNikra. And the whole point of this railway was to provide a continuous rail route from Egypt, which was a main base of the British, via the Sinai into Palestine, then up the coast, and then into Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, and eventually to Europe, and to have a continuous railway line that would be used for the supply of Allied troops and supplies. If my memory serves me right, and I looked for details, but I couldn't find it, I think Jewish refugees, there was a train that actually came into Palestine during the Second World War through the tunnel that actually carried refugees, Jewish refugees from Europe. I didn't find details of that. I'd be grateful for anyone that has more details or knows about that. Anyway, on the 14th of March, 1948, the tunnel at Rosh HaNikra was blown up by the Haganah to prevent our friendly neighbors from Lebanon invading Israel through the tunnel. And that was the end, basically, of railway services between Haifa and Beirut and Tripoli. And last of all, automobile. I say automobile because the only automobile that's ever been designed in Israel was the Susita. In 1957, a company called Autocars was founded in Haifa. They decided to import technology from Reliant, of Robin Reliant fame, perhaps not the best of choices, and they built a fiberglass car. There were a lot of them that were sold because government agencies were forced to buy them. How did the name come about? Well, they issued a competition, and Yosef Shuv, he came up with the name Susita. Susita is a place. It's actually a Roman Byzantine town which overlooks, it's on the east bank of the Sea of Galilee, and he came up with the name Susita. He won for winning this competition. He got, you guessed it, he got a Susita, and here you see his Susita in Ramat Gan, basically totally totaled. And perhaps that's not a surprise if you import technology from Reliant. You're all unmuted. That's it for tonight. Apologies about the last video clip that I'm sure only the British, I'm sure that was all lost on the Americans.